producers are able to start moving to that. Hello, Josh Lindsey. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So, few things just to go through in relation to this. This is your time slot. Josh is one of my colleagues from America originally, lived in Australia, and now, unfortunately, lived in the UK. It's a lovely place, I'm sure, in London. I don't particularly believe it, but, you know, he likes it. So, I'm going to pass it over to you, Josh, whenever you are ready.
So, thank you, Cam, and good morning to everyone. I know it's I get the early slot. I think it's maybe the best slot or maybe the worst slot, who knows, but I thank you for joining me today. So my presentation is going to be titled, Are We Even Playing the Same Game? A critical review on genre taxonomy in esports research. I, of course, am Josh Lindsey. I work at the University of Staffordshire with Cameron Van Loo, who is my favorite colleague. I'll just say that, yay. And I am an esports lecturer also. Now, my work today is built on is built on the idea of Schnitz's 2025 book, Genres in Video Games and Impossible Taxonomy. The background behind this book is originally written in German 4 years ago and only recently been translated. The arguments presented are claimed to be more common in game studies within German-speaking academic circles, so they haven't really reached the English-speaking academic circles yet. I put this into context of esports by addressing esports-specific concerns and arguing the ideas that genre categorization is problematic in esports academic research. I do not attempt, similar to Schnitz, to provide a clear and absolute answer, only to open the idea that genres should be critically reflected upon, and that a more flexible and detailed empirical approach is used when determining genres in esports. This is not an outright denial of genres categories, just the importance of them in empirical circles. I believe they are still useful for general discourse especially, and ability to categorize, useful to creators, producers, audiences. I myself will still be using genres throughout this presentation, as it does help us signpost the ideas we are talking about, as they are still culturally significant. Now, brief overview, I won't go too much into this, but we'll be talking a little bit on the definitions, the video game genres themselves, a concept called abject ambigu, and esports taxonomy with examples. Then I'll be going into my proposed idea, which is, again, building on Schitz's work within the three dimensions into it, and then I'll conclude with further research considerations. Now, I always like to start these presentations with definitions, so we make sure that we're all on the same page. For consistency, I still use the definition provided by Schnitz when we're talking about video games. There's three different aspects that makes up what a video game is. They subscribe to the same degree, some degree of ludic interaction. They are used within a video channel. This can be a TV, computer, or VR goggles, and ideally conceive themselves as a video game or computer game, regardless of the target audience or hardware. So if they claim to video games, they can be a video game if they meet the other two criteria. I also like to talk about my definition that I use for esports, an organized video game competition with an agreed upon set of rules. This is, of course, adapted from Wagner 2026 work and Jenny et al.'s 2016 work. Now, I do always like to emphasize the word video games because, again, we're talking about the aspect of esports being incorporated by video games and competition that sets it apart from the normal casual play. Agreed upon set of rules is also an important part that makes this different from the video game category. I make an assumption that can be argued by people. I like to say that video games and esports sit within the same meso-level organization, and they are thus affected by each other, with video games being a hierarchical system than esports. Video games are in themselves a trickle-down effect. They are separate, and they still have their separate entities, but video games, esports is still reliant on the video game industry as a whole in most cases. It's important to consider that the genre attached to a video game is usually used within esports, as you'll see later as an example, but does not mean that there is not esports-specific genres. Now, how a genre of video games is determined. This is using previous work. Schnitz defines video game genres as the classification of text according to shared characteristics, which helps define meaningful boundaries. They are since a snapshot in time. They are from historical context, they are from marketing and marketing dominators, and they are from technological advancement. They have five different factors here, as we'll see. Perspective is a big one that plays in determining a genre. So how do we see the avatar for our game, or do we even see the game's world from first-person perspective or from the avatar's eyes? A good example of this is first-person shooters and third-person shooters. Of course, we know the difference between CS and how that perspective is looking, and the difference between something, say, Guild Wars or Fortnite with a third-person perspective. Next is the avatar movement. How fast or slow, chaotic or coordinated can the avatar be moved? In context of esports, it should also be how we actually move the avatar. Is it point and click, or is it with the WSD, or is it with a directional pad on a controller? A subject is another factor. So what content, aesthetic tropes, and themes does the video game deal with? This is not so much into the esports aspect. This is really hammering on to the more video game genre level, but it still can play a role within esports. Game objective, so how is the video game to be completed according to its rule, and is an implied end state even intended or possible? So of course, when we're talking about multiplayer games and live service games, there is no really ever intended end, but there is a set of rules that dictate how we can play the multiplayer in a certain boundary. So take League of Legends, this is a very set rule. This is a game that you win by destroying the matrix. It's very set into the system. Also, the number of players, is the game single player or multiplayer? Again, this is a very important concept, especially when we're talking about esports in general. Now, moving on to the concept I want to focus on here, object ambigu. This is the idea that an object is impossible to find from its origin or nature. I like to use Schnitz's example he provided in his book, where he talked about an alien object crashing into Earth. It might look similar to, say, a computer or a satellite, but we know that it's alien based on other characteristics, and we don't know how to define it. So we see it, we know it, we think it's something else, but we don't know exactly how to define its nature. It is something that it's almost impossible to determine its origin. Video games also have an unlimited amount of possibilities into what genre it can fit into. So how do we actually truly define a video game? We might find that we might know it fits somewhere else, but does it truly fit? Or does it fit in other places? It's not always easy to define. There's no solution oriented, but distribution oriented. A lot of this is coming from a modern art background. Now, genres have an important function in everyday discussion, as I said in the introduction, as they provide meaning and context to us to discuss and debate our favorite games and types of games we're playing. Human nature longs for us to have categories into things, and reflecting outright the ideas that genres do not exist within a cultural aspect, to my opinion, is a fool's errand. We want to have categories. We use categories in everyday speak. We use it in marketing. We use it and how to sell titles. We use it to say that we are a fan of this particular genre, and this is how we search out. So it is this dichotomy that exists, that the creation of a taxonomy helps to develop a critical awareness of this dichotomy, even if it is paradoxical at times. So I'm saying there is a taxonomy that is good and it's useful, but it still creates a paradox of it's not exactly fitting within that taxonomy all the time. There's too much ambiguity around it. The biggest question I have, another question I have is it a bottom-up or a top-down approach? Do we start with something very specific and then we move to a more general aspect, or we start with something general and move to a specific aspect? How do we empirically look at the genres attached to esports? Is it such that we start with a game, with a genre, and then put the game into it? Or shall we first see the game, then put the game into a specific genre? If a genre is to be a function, then it must exist before the game, and all the attributes confirm to that. Is this based upon historical information? Are we just copying and pasting the past to meet the future? Or shall we instead be looking toward future-proofing dimensions that allow for flexibility, which I'll get to at the end of my presentation? The big thing is, where does genres actually come from, especially if we're going from more of the bottom up perspective, or they can appear from, say, marketing, They can appear from journalism. They can appear from pedagogy, so how game studies and how game designer academics teach their students. They can appear in academia, how we empirically research things like canonization. So what are the hallmark titles within a certain area? These are important to consider because a lot of historical context relies upon these taxonomies. Genres appear and disappear based on historical trends and limitations and accelerations in technology themselves. So a good example I have here is that BR games were around before 2010, but did not become a genre until their popularity. So then we have to backtrack and then start labeling games as what BR games were. They didn't come to really popularity until PUBG and Fortnite started taking over, and then the BR genre was defined and explained, and now it's moved forward into empirical studies. Previously, though, things such as H1Z1 might not have been labeled an actual BR, or now it should be retrospectively labeled certain things. The biggest thing, one of the key research, one of the papers I read, is this idea by Bickman in 2020 that esports players might develop different skill sets based on the games they're playing. So it's important to understand what games they are actually playing and how they are playing these games. This is where the genre taxonomy kind of plays into it. I'm going to go into some examples in the next few slides about the questions and reviews of the taxonomy that's used in esports research. Now, for the first example I have is Mendoza et al. Now, while this study did a systematic review on the populations of esports research, I chose to include it as it does have a brief section into genres used within the field. It's not specifically looking into genres, but it's looking into esports populations. The goal is to determine how esports players were identified and what criteria for an esports player is so between the casual and competitive nature. While their analysis found that 32 of their chosen studies used one genre and 16 used two or more. The biggest categories was FPS 29, MOBA 28, Sports 12, BR and Fighting 4 apiece. They categorized first-person shooter all together, and likely a number of papers probably do the same. But does a first-person shooter title tell the whole story? Is there a difference between, say, CS and Valorant? Is there a difference between Valorant and Call of Duty? Is there a difference between Call of Duty and Halo? These aspects need to be kind of touched on because it doesn't go into enough detail into what these genres are, because first-person shooter is a very broad uh, taxonomy. The next paper I want to talk about is Hammer and the Zombies. I did not say that right. I apologize. It's a taxonomy in the genre in game genres within the Handbook of Esports. As of course, we know this is a very big book. This is a very big book for ERNC. It is a very good handbook into esports research. Problem I have is that games can meet multiple genres that they propose, and they are the categories. The taxonomies are pretty stagnant. More so, the games are linked to big title names. So here I have the example of the shooter category. It has tactical movement, run and gun, team objective, battle royale, and big shooter. The example I want to propose against this model is Halo. So Halo is linked in their taxonomy as a run and gun. Yes, it fits, but it also fits team objective shooter. Also, what happens if Halo gets their BR? There's been rumored about it. Do we then change the title's category, or do we create another one? This is something that I see, and I'll give an example later, as for World of Warcraft that has 3 different types of esports titles. Do we create new titles and put these specific esports aspects that competed in into different areas? Another example is Hero. Hero in the Hero Overwatch. Our Overwatch in the past has been labeled a hero shooter. It's not here. It's instead fits within the team objective shooter. But if we added hero shooter into this taxonomy, then we have a problem with Valorant because Valorant is labeled as a tactical shooter. But then we have Valorant needing to fit both into the hero shooter. Or as the next study I'm going to talk about, Zhang and Byron claim that it is a MOBA-inspired first-person shooter, which is a whole bunch of words that gets kind of confusing about MOBAs and first-person, and they're not even talking about the tactical aspect. So the idea is, do we need to create a new genre if a new game does not easily fit within one of these categories? Or do we need to find a way to identify these categories and then identify other aspects around it? The other thing is the empirical process behind it. So again, where do these come from and what do they form? Now, the other example I want to give is Jane Byron's. Talk about this very briefly. It's like to more of an untraditional approach because it labels 3 different categories: imagination, physical, and sports simulation. Theirs is a more a priori coding. They pick these based on their experience. They need a lot of empirical process into it, and then they use it on spectator motivation to determine how people are looking within these. It's an interesting taxonomy, but again, it doesn't really fit very well because it doesn't really tell the empirical process behind how they determine those 3. Now, the example I give is WoW. Now, WoW is an interesting one because it's typically labeled an MMORPG, and rightfully so. It is the poster child of the genre, and it's one of them that's been around for the longest. However, it can be tricky when we are discussing the different esports titles available within it. While those who play the game know the difference between PvP and PvE, those who don't play might not understand. The MMORPG aspect is always a factor, but as the game progresses, the need for player interaction lessens, so they're not exactly always an MMORPG. Some people might only be playing PvP, which is, of course, the raw arena. But then some other people might also be playing more asynchronous aspect, where they're playing Mystic Plus Racing, or they're doing Race to First. These are included in the genre, but it's not MMORPG. It should be its own established category itself, or at least example into this. The issue I'm trying to establish is there's energy for this debate these games belong to based on personal experience, opinions, and cultural background. Now I have 3 different dimensions that I want to talk about very briefly because I only have around 5 minutes. When in system mechanics, this is the first dimension I'm proposing. This is the mechanical aspect element of a video game. It is the procedural comprehension, static, and governed by code. It's how a player operates within the game. This dimension also describes the mechanical peripheral activity within interactivity, so the mouse and keyboard controller, VR headsets, and such. The next proposition is fiction aesthetics. This is the narrative and audio-visual composition of the game. This really plays into the video game genres more so, less than the actual esports aspects. But I do like to talk about things such as microtransactions and cosmetic aspects within this, because it really can go into fandom, transmedia storytelling, and spectator motivation. Last is social ritual. This is how humans' actions and self and others have experience on the game. This includes mechanical communications between each other. Now, for esports consideration with each of these dimensions, the mechanical system, so what are the restrictions given to the players? What technologies are the players competing on? So mouse and keyboard controller, the fiction aesthetic, the simulation of the real world, so how does that actually play into the rules that's dictating the game? The cosmetic things, microtransactions, how those skins and things are within the ecosystem, and social ritual, how players interacting with each other. Is it team-based or is it solo? Is it synchronous or asynchronous? How the multiplayer aspects actually going into it. So I have a example here with Rocket League on this. So for the mechanical side, I just label it as a sports arcade. Notice that is a genre that is included from Hammer and Basombe taxonomy within the mechanical aspect. I use that as it relates to a real world situation and is a good way of actually signposting what this game is about. It uses game consoles and a PC. It uses controllers and it uses mouse and keyboards. For the fictional aspect, it is a arcade. It uses microtransactions. It had brand crossovers. I like to include that just as a little bit extra, especially when we're talking about this genre. For the social aspects or how the game played, it is synchronous, so it's playing at the same time, but it also has 3 different modes. It is team-based, and it is 3v3 or 2v2, or it is solo with 1v1. If you just say that it is Rocket League, we might miss some aspects that it is both controller-based and that it is mouse and keyboard-based also, and that there is 3v3, 2v2, and 1v1 that all are competed against. Now, again, when I talk about going back to the other paper, when we talk about different skill sets between different titles, it's important to note that mouse and keyboard player and a controller player might have different needs or different aspects. Also, there might be different motivation in playing a game between a 3v3 player and a 1v1 player. These things are given more detail when we're actually going into when we actually give further into these dimensions. This is a rough drawing. Trust me, I'm not a graphic designer, so I do apologize for this. This is how kind of the dimensions kind of line up. It's not about making this precise. It's about explaining your experience within it and giving more detail into an esports genre. So for Rocket League, we break down the mechanical system, the fiction aesthetics, and the social ritual. And we try to bring it out so we can use this in a more generalized aspect to describe our empirical process and how we are defining these titles. It is more than just a sports arcade. It is a game that we play on PC and console. We play on mouse and keyboard. We play on controller. It is an arcade style. It has brand crossover. It has 3 different modes of multiplayer, so we can fully dive into it. Other titles might have more important aspects that we can examine. So in conclusion, the idea is to bring further considerations into genre theory and what it means for esports, being careful with generalizations from previous research, as the titles themselves or the categories themselves might not be what we need for our paper using to justify. Problematic with strict taxonomies, instead using it as guides to help further our understanding, and using dimensions instead to provide more detail into an esports title, not just using one. Further research considerations, of course, is being careful about when using genres, apply empirical methods when determining categories and genres, using titles whether in genres or detailing genres, again, in the dimensions as I suggested. Okay, I think I am right on time, so I will open it up to questions, and you can, of course, find me on LinkedIn as the QR code to my LinkedIn.
Hello, Josh. Hope you're doing okay. Hello, Josh. I've got a bit of echo on my end, so I'm going to be trying to be quiet and also get through the same thing. In relation to questions, I don't have any on here, and it feels really weird that I'm going to ask you a question as someone who works with you. But we'll give it a go. So when we looked at genres and you brought out Rocket League as the microtransactions or the IP focus aspect, I thought that was quite interesting. So the one that I want us to talk about really is about the introduction of IP. Do you think that's now becoming a mainstay of live service games? Is that just to drag more players in? And does that have an impact in relation to your model that you are building up in relation to taxonomy?
Yes, there I am.
I'm having some issues with audio on my end. So we talked about you talked about IP, you talked about models. You went through the process in relation to Rocket League. Do you think there's going to be a situation in relation to when you talked about battle royales as well, or BRs as you like to abbreviate it to? Do you think there's any other genre of games, I guess, that's moving forward, let's go to game studies focus, that are starting to carve out their own sort of pattern or own sort of genre themselves? And what sort of genre do you see that being?
I think most even new games fit within a historical genre, and then they carve out kind of their own niche. So we saw that with Valorant. Valorant is a copycat of CS, but they added the hero abilities aspect to it, which creates a extra dimension and more complication that we need to kind of talk on. As far as titles, I think anything and everything could pop up. Currently, the most popular ones, Marvel Rivals is a copycat of Overwatch, so it's still copying it. Is it Deadlock? The new Valve MOBA shooter. That one's adding an all-new dimension of a MOBA third-person shooter. Again, this is something that's going to continually evolve and change, and we just need to find that flexibility in our taxonomy so we don't just categorize them too strict.
Perfect. And then I've got one last question from chat. Someone's kindly added one for me here, which is, do you think a lot of esports titles, because audiences are getting louder and some games are sort of dying down, because their current audience is not as young and excited as the next generation, do you think we're going to start seeing the death of some esports titles? I think probably the best example of this is something like Dota, from your perspective. I know you're a big Dota fan, would you use Dota as the example for this one?
Yeah, I think historical and contextual situations is probably the most impactful onto the genres themselves. It's all about cultural background and what's significant at the time. So we have something, I mean, if we think about Quake is a great example of a game that's kind of just still around, more for the old heads who've been playing for a long time. And it has its own genre. I don't even know, I can't think of the title what people use for it because I'm not even into it. But it's the same thing. If Dota and MOBAs move into that system, then yeah, they could just slowly become historical context, and it's just then they're canonized as that genre.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Josh Lindsey. That's all the questions we have at the moment. You can always ask Josh Lindsey. He did show his LinkedIn in terms of that. Do connect with Josh. He's a fantastic guy, well-travelled after moving around the world at this point. We're going to go to a short intermission now before we get our next presenter, which will be Susanna. It's also my paper, but I'm not presenting. I'm just here to host today and try to look like I've got some hair left. So have a wonderful day, Josh. Look forward to seeing you around.